By now, you've probably heard about Valve's new collection of hardware, the Steam Controller, Steam Machine, and Steam Frame. Check out my prior video for full details on everything going on with this announcement. But I want to talk about the Steam Frame today. Not about the Steam Frame itself, but something it is using. So this is an ARM-powered VR headset. You can either play games directly on your computer and then stream them to the headset, or play games directly on the headset. Now, it can go and play Android VR games, which are obviously going to be ARM-based games, but the games on Steam, the games you're going to be running on your computer, which you can also run on the headset, those are not ARM. Those are x86. Those are for a regular CPU you might have in your computer right now. So how would you run those on the headset? Well, this is relying on a bit of tech known as FEX. Now, a lot of the articles about the Steam Frame and about FEX sort of make it out to be this new custom thing that nobody knew existed. This is not the case though. FEX is completely open source, it's licensed under the MIT license, and has been around for a number of years right now. It was first created back in 2019 by Ryan Hodek, otherwise known as Sonic Advance 1 over on GitHub. He has done a lot of work on this project, but it's not just a one-man show. A bunch of other people have worked on it as well. Of course, like most open source projects, you know, the person who started it generally is the main person, but of course there are some names in here you might recognize, like Alyssa Rosenzweig. And as stated in the README, FEX allows you to run x86 applications on your ARM64 Linux devices, which is what your Steam Frame is, but there are other things, and we'll get to that, similar to QEMU User and Box64. It offers broad compatibility with both 32-bit and 64-bit binaries, and it can be used alongside Wine/Proton to play Windows games. This is exactly what the Steam Frame is doing. It supports forwarding API calls to host system libraries like OpenGL or Vulkan to reduce emulation overhead. An experimental code cache helps minimize in-game stuttering as much as possible. Furthermore, a per-app configuration system allows tweaking performance per game, e.g. by skipping costly memory model emulation. We also provide a user-friendly FEX config GUI to explore and change these settings. This is quite similar to what you'd have to do with Proton, where you might have a global Proton setting, but different games are going to require different versions of Proton or different config options set, things like that. So you can't just have one global thing and apply it to every single application you want to run. So basically what it's doing is translating those x86 calls for your Intel or AMD CPU into ARM64 calls for what you would have in a Snapdragon chip or the Apple Silicon, because this is actually being used in the Asahi Linux project, AAA gaming on Asahi Linux. This came out last year, around October last year, and there were games actually running on Linux on Apple Silicon. This was a major step, because this showed a number of things. One, you could actually make GPU drivers that are remotely functional, that can play modern video games, but two, you can play these through a collection of technology, that being FEX, Wine, DXVK, and VKD3D Proton, and actually play regular Windows games on this. So FEX is definitely not new. You can use this right now. Also, if you're the kind of person that cares about gaming on an Android device, you may hear about apps like GameHub. This app is actually using FEX in the background, and this is what lets you play Windows Steam games on an Android phone. Now, obviously performance is going to depend on the hardware and all this good stuff, but you can actually do that, and FEX is what powers that. Sometimes it's Box64 in other applications. There are multiple things that can do similar things here, but this is a really cool bit of tech. Whilst it may not be this super well-known piece of software, like Wine for example, where if you think of Linux, if you think of gaming, you know about Wine because you know about Proton, FEX is not new. It's definitely not as old as Wine. Wine's been around since the 90s, but FEX has also been around for a couple of years at this point. And FEX does have a wiki of game support. Now, I've not checked everything here because there's 200 entries on the list, but there are notable things which can cause issues. One thing being, De novo anti-tamper. This is a hit and miss thing. Some games with it work. Other games like Hogwarts Legacy, well, at least as of the time of this being updated, I don't actually know if this is completely up to date. That wasn't working. And it may be based on the version of de novo anti-tamper because FF15, which is quite a bit of an older game, is also using it, but this one appears to be working. Another thing that can cause problems is known as VM Protect, like is used in Resident Evil 4, so keep that in mind as well. And then some games just don't work, and it's not actually clear why they don't work. It's not clear if it's the anti-cheat or anti-tamper DRM stuff. It just doesn't. But don't be tempted to think that this is just not going to work for anything. A lot of games work totally fine. Let's pick Bayonetta. No problem at all. Let's pick another one. Let's say Risk of Rain 2. No problem at all. Let's find another one. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. This one does have a problem. This is de novo. Okay, fair enough. Let's go Dragon Quest 11. It works. Let's go another one. Let's say, Sid Meier's whatever. Blah, yeah, playable. There you go. Civilization works fine. But even with the games that don't work, keep in mind Valve's approach to Linux and the state that Proton was in. So, who remembers the announcement for Proton and the list of games it had for what was currently working? Because it's not like the list we have today. This was the entire list of supported games. Very importantly, Nier Automata, because that's actually the reason that DXVK was made. The original dev of DXVK wanted to play Nier Automata on Linux. Yeah, there's a long story there. But this was the entire list. This was the list of games that were known to be working. But even at this stage, things were working a lot more than just this. But very quickly, things were also improved, games were tested, improvements were made, and now we're at the point where, like, 90% of the games on Steam just work. I expect and I hope that FEX is handled in a very similar way to the way that Proton was handled, because with Proton, they didn't just take Wine and say, this is ours now. We're just gonna do our own thing with it. Yes, they do have the Proton repo. This is where they make the Proton-specific changes, but this is also just a collection of additional other tools like DXVK and other things which don't necessarily make sense in the upstream Wine project. And DXVK also started outside of Valve, outside of Steam. Proton is this collection of software, but they don't just keep changes inside of Proton. They will go and upstream changes that are relevant to the main Wine project back up to the Wine project. And not just the Wine project. They've made changes to Arch Linux, to the AMD GPU drivers, to the Wayland protocols. There is a lot of Valve people involved in Wayland protocol discussions. Valve isn't just coming into open source and saying, hey, you guys are doing really cool stuff, we're going to take that and we're going to build a product. They're saying, hey, we're going to build a product and we're going to help improve the software that is powering our product and make everything better. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Valve is basically a shining example of a company nicely interacting with open source. Of course, there are open source companies that everything they do is open source, but Valve isn't that. Valve is a company that sometimes makes video games, mainly sells video games, most of what they have is proprietary. But then the stuff that started as open source is still open source, and they're helping out the main projects, not just taking it for themselves. But what I think is really cool isn't just going and contributing patches back upstream. Everybody can do that. That's something that everyone should be doing if they make a patch that is relevant to the upstream project. What I think is super cool, though, is there is a lot of people that started out as just regular old volunteer open source devs, and Valve has gone and hired them to work on the thing they were working on because Valve is using that and it's very important. People involved in Proton were hired by Valve to continue working on those components and make them even better. They weren't just saying, oh, we're going to rely on this volunteer dev and just do nothing about it. They actually made it so this person can work on the thing that they want to work on. And the logic makes perfect sense. Why rely on a volunteer who might get burnt out and might disappear at some point when you can hire them, make sure they can work on the thing that they're working on, make sure they're being paid well, and then, well, it's a lot less likely they're just gonna disappear. And if you have problems that are affecting your customers, if the dev is an employee of yours, it's a lot easier to convince them to go and fix the problem affecting your customers than if they were just a volunteer working on just the things they want to work on. And sometimes not hiring them directly, but paying an open source consultancy firm to work on a project you want to have work on. For example, the Tech Paladin contract with Valve. This is work on KDE. This is where people like Nate Graham and David Edmondson of the KDE Project happen to be working. This used to belong to Blue Systems, and there was like a split there, and now it's moved over to Nate's new company. It's a big whole mess, but this is a big thing helping to improve the KDE experience. It's not the only thing. KDE wouldn't collapse if Valve wasn't supporting this, but this is a big thing that is causing improvement. Now, considering how early it is after the announcement, I'm not aware of any cases like this with FEX. It's possible someone from Valve reached out, and maybe they weren't allowed to talk about it before the announcement was made. Maybe they were reached out to and didn't want to take a job. Maybe they haven't reached out yet and are planning to do so in the future. I really do hope, like with Wine, like with Proton, like with DXVK, like with KDE, FEX also receives the same level of support that those pieces of software have been given. I believe I said this in my last video about the Steam hardware. Assuming nothing changes in leadership, assuming Valve actually wants to go and make Linux hardware and make Linux actually a viable long-term platform, which is what they've been doing for the past 12 years? Were the Steam machines 2013? Something like that. At least the past decade. This basically cements the fact that the projects they are supporting are going to be supported at least for the foreseeable future, at least for another, 3 to 5 years. And we don't know if we're getting a second Steam Deck. There's been rumors about it, and Valve said, oh, we'll release one when we can have enough performance that makes it justifiable. All this good stuff. We don't know if anything's actually being worked on. There's not been any leaked renders or anything like that. So it could happen, it might not. Who knows? But at least for now, we have new hardware, and this means that they're probably gonna keep doing what they've been doing. And as a Linux user, as someone who likes KDE, as someone that likes Proton, all of this is awesome to me. But what about you? What do you think of this direction? And do you think Valve is going to continue supporting the projects like they've been doing? Do you think FEX is going to get the same level of support that Proton has and all this other stuff has? Or do you think it's just going to be this thing on the outside they don't really care about? I'd love to know. So if you liked the video, go like the video, go subscribe as well. Let me know your thoughts down below. And if you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out Patreon, subscribe to the Pay link in the description down below. I forgot my outro as always, so stay FEXy.
Like this.